Okay, so this is being recorded and will be posted online. So on the first order of business, as usual, minutes. Any volunteers to scribe?
I will offer to do what I can as usual.
Thank you, Nick. Okay, otherwise for the next call, we have it planned for, as usual, 2 weeks from now, March 26th at 10 a.m. PST, so same time for US-based folks. And unless
So are they going to be 10 a.m. now from now? Because the calendar says 11. So can you change the calendar for people?
I thought I changed it to be, oh, it's, I don't know.
Because we're in the DST twilight zone for a few weeks.
Yes, but the question is
from Europe, then it sticks to Europe timeline.
Yeah. So I have set, okay, so I have not set it to, yes, I will, I think we settled on 10 a.m. PST in general, which is, yeah. So right now, is it not 10 a.m. PST?
It is. It is.
Okay, yeah, so I think we changed it in order to accommodate some folks who had conflicts at 11. So, yeah, but right now, so you're saying the calendar invite said 11?
So right now, the 26th is at 11. So we should change it to avoid confusion, probably.
Okay, I will fix that. Basically, I just need to set it to be PST based because I think it's probably, you know.
You did set up on Europe Paris time. I sent you an email like 2 months ago about it.
And I thought I changed it, and it looks like I didn't. So I will.
You don't have daylight savings there. It didn't kick off
yet. In a couple weeks.
That's why then.
Yes, I will change it so it will be at 10 a.m. Okay, and with that, I think we can move on to the actual agenda. And Nicholas, do you want to talk about event timing?
Sure, I'll present. Is that, can you all see the presentation?
Yeah,
I can.
Okay, because I don't see myself presenting in the. All right, so let's talk about event timing since we haven't talked about it for a while. So I'll give a brief recap on the API objectives. I also linked the repository on WICG. Oh, the slides are also in the agenda document, so you can get to those there. So 2 main objectives. First, we want to enable developers to gather data on input delay. So what that means is how long it takes for basically the browser to begin processing the input of users. And obviously this delay can be caused by things like long tasks because we can't just stop a long task and immediately start processing an input when it is currently running. And the other key piece of data we want to expose is synchronous input processing latency. So this means basically how long does it take from the user doing something to the screen actually updating based on that something. So how long does it take until the next paint after the event handler has run, or the event handlers have run. So those are the two objectives. And also, sorry, also what are non-objectives? First, we do not want to measure asynchronous work caused by events. So in the previous slide, I said, how long does it take to measure the response to input? But the event timing API will only measure synchronous work, that is response to input. So for example, if your event handlers just post a task, like for example, do like set timeout something, or they perform a fetch and await for that fetch, then those kinds of work will not be captured by the API. Based on the previous discussions in the working group, we decided that that kind of tracking is better off done in user timing, because user timing enables more flexibility. So you should be able to specify an event, but you should also be able to specify something that is not an event and track the asynchronous work either way. Another non-objective is measuring continuous events. So by continuous, I mean those that can be dispatched a lot, like mouse move, pointer move, touch move, wheel, and drag. For those, there are things like the hardware dependencies as well as browser preferences regarding how often those events are dispatched. And so event timing tries to make sense out of slow inputs based on how many there were. So due to the fact that how many there are of these continuous events is pretty relevant, we don't want to expose them in this API. Another non-objective is measuring scroll performance. Scrolls can be caused by many things, and some of them don't even have to be related to input events. For example, if I use the scroll bar to scroll down, those input events won't really be captured by any event handlers, but there will still be a scroll. So for that reason, scroll performance is hard, and it should be decoupled from event timing. Any questions so far?
On the asynchronous work part, I believe that at some iteration we talked about measuring, basically being able to measure the paint after the event so that we'll be able to somehow correlate the paint operations with the event. If that paint work is happening as a result of a fetch, that means that it won't be captured here, if I understand that correctly?
Yes, because fetch has to be done
Yeah.
asynchronously, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, we would suggest using user timing, because that was the feedback provided from last time, that asynchronous work from events should be tracked in user timing. And I suppose in that case, you will always have event listeners one way or another. So it does make sense to, like, it seems feasible to add JavaScript to track those events. And you must specify what is the asynchronous work that you're trying to track, because the user agent cannot really, at least right now, cannot really do an informed guess on when does the work triggered by these event handlers end, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
All right. So we will be exposing two different kinds of inputs in the event timing API. First is the first input. So we have a list here of what types of input are eligible for first input: key down, mouse down, pointer down, followed by pointer up, and click. the first input will always be exposed. The idea behind always exposing it is that, one, it's not going to be spammy because it's basically one per frame per page load. And two, the first input is usually, at least from Chrome data that we've gathered, the input delay for the first input is usually much larger than the input delay for the average input. So it makes sense to give developers concrete insight into how bad the first input is or how good it is. The other thing we're exposing in event timing is general input delay. So here in this slide, it's like, sorry, a lot of text, but basically we're exposing click events, mouse events, pointer events, some key events, some composition events, some drag and drop events, and excluding the ones that are continuous for the reasons I stated before. So for all of these input events, we only expose the ones whose duration is greater than 100, which means the rounded duration is greater than 104 because we're rounding the duration to the nearest multiple of 8. And the idea is that 100 is a good cutoff because of the Rail guidelines saying that you should respond to user input within 100 milliseconds, and the event duration is kind of meant to capture precisely that, responding to the user input.
And Nicolas, that means that if any of those input events takes less than 104, we won't be notified? Is that what you mean on this slide?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
Of course, exposing every single input event would be very spammy because there's a lot of them. So that's why we expose, well, that's one of the reasons we only expose the slow ones. And you should really only care about the ones that are taking a long time, if that makes sense.
And for, it's not my industry, but I'm just wondering, for the game people, is 100 enough? Or like, is that something they might want to configure? You know, like if you click or...
Right, yeah, that's a good question. We could always add a parameter to the observe call where you could configure the timestamp to be a little bit lower. I'm not entirely sure how lower we can go for, I would have to ask privacy and security to help me think through it. But I do think it's very feasible to let the threshold be variable. The only concern there is that we do intend to support the buffered flag. So it can be a little confusing to have to support variable thresholds because then, well, we basically would need to store all the slow events where you define slow using the smallest possible threshold. So we don't want the threshold to be too small because otherwise we're storing a lot of data, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the default makes complete sense. I was just wondering if there was a use case to, as you say, maybe lower it, you know, for specific user. But yeah, and then it would be a trade-off for them. You know, if they lower it, they would have to deal with a lot more stuff. Yeah.
For the buffered case, I would think that in cases where you really care about faster clicks are cases that are highly JavaScript driven. So at this point, you probably already registered your observers. So I would suspect that keeping the default, you know, the one that's being buffered, and then, you know, only accumulate events that are lower than that if explicitly asked for.
Right. Yeah, that is also another possibility. I don't know how confusing that would be to developers, or like I imagine already getting a bug being like, you didn't tell me of all the slow events before I registered my observer, but it's really possible that it's not that confusing. Like,
Yeah.
we could just do that. That makes sense.
It seemed like a good place to start and see what folks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's some good feedback. Thanks. All right. Any other comments so far?
There's probably a use case for only caring about longer than 100 milliseconds as well. Like you really only want to receive the really slow events in some cases. So
and certainly that would be easier because we don't need to store anything more. You just filter out the ones that are not meeting the threshold. So I think, yeah, we can add a parameter to observe. Now that we have the infrastructure for that, we should be using it, right? So we can add a parameter for, well, I don't know the name right now, but like duration threshold, whatever. And I'll just need to think what is the minimum possible duration threshold that would make sense.
Yeah.
All right. So to recap what is exposed via this API, first, input is always exposed. Sorry, first of all, first input is always exposed. Then slow inputs are exposed when their direct duration exceeds the threshold, which, as mentioned, could be a parameter to the performance observer. And also, I guess, yeah, I had a question about whether entry types should also be a parameter. And I suppose I expect the answer will be yes. So basically, you would not receive all of those parameters because you don't necessarily care about all of them. And it's possible that you get some noise if you observe all of these, whereas just observing the types that you care about may make more sense. So we should also add a parameter to the observer so that you can specify a subset of the types for the ones you actually care about.
How would feature detection work here? So are we expecting all browsers to enable observation of all types, or will this list grow over time?
Feature detection for the types that are eligible for observing?
Yeah, supported event types, kind of. Yeah, because I see in the next bullet point you have a total count, but that we could have a case where one implementation supports 10 types of, one type, and it doesn't necessarily match.
Yeah, so I think that could be done with the event counts interface that I'm going to talk about, because you could just iterate over the dictionary to see the ones that are not null.
Okay.
I think. Actually, I'm not entirely sure. I have to double check to make sure there's a feasible way to detect that. But yeah, I think that's a good idea to make sure there's an easy way to detect all the types that are supported for observation, all the event types. I'll make sure that we have something, but I think we do already. So the third thing we're trying to expose is the total event count for the event types that are supported. The idea of exposing that is that it lets you compute percentiles on either input delay or input total latency based on that count. If you didn't have the count, then an increase in user engagement metrics or similar would result in an increase in the number of slow events if there's no corresponding performance improvements. So that would be pretty confusing. The event count helps you basically have a way to, what's the word? Well, basically have a denominator so that you can do rational estimates on what's the average user experience or what's the 90th percentile of the user experience and so on. So for the ones that are not exposed, you would just assume that the duration is 0. Doesn't matter too much how long the duration is for events that are fast enough. And then based on that assumption, you can compute percentiles.
By saying that, you're just saying that for the ones that are not exposed, it's anywhere from between 0 and 104, but you don't really know. It's just somewhere in that range. They're the fast ones.
Between 0 and 100.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Unrounded, but sure.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, the idea is that if they were not exposed, then you should consider them fast and not report and not care about how long they actually took so much. So I also wanted to report the Chromium status, although I don't think we have anyone. Do we have anyone from Firefox or Apple?
Ryosuke said he can't make it, and I don't see Ben on the call, so. Okay.
Well, then, yeah, well, I can still give the Chromium status, but we're currently shipping first input timing. So first input is the entry type, and it's used by approximately, slightly more than 3% of page loads, according to the Chrome status popularity page. So that is pretty substantial. And we are planning to ship event counts as well as full event timing in the near future. So that would be the event entry type, which will let you know of all the slow events. I can go over the performance event timing interface really quickly. It will be a performance entry, and it will have first name, which is the event type. The entry type, as I said, is event. It will be first input for first input timing. Then start time will be the event timestamp, so the hardware timestamp of the event. Processing start is when event handlers begin executing. Processing end is when they finish. And the duration is basically the next paint after event handlers have run. Finally, we also have cancelable. So it will tell you if the event was cancelable or not. And a new addition based on feedback about there not being any attribution at all is the event target. So the idea is that we will expose the event target, but notice that it is nullable. So we can't always expose event targets. If they are in Shadow DOM, we cannot expose them. In addition, if they become disconnected from the document, then we also cannot expose them because they may be garbage collected. And we don't want to keep them in memory just for this interface, of course. And you also shouldn't store them in your JavaScript. You should store certain identifiers for the element, if that makes sense. Otherwise, it will be memory leaks. Does that addition make sense to people, or any comments?
Potentially something that's also applicable to the current, like not just to this new edition, but so the name you said would be the event type. That means that we're likely to have duplicate for names, right? And that kind of breaks away from the typical convention of performance entries where the name is a URL, I guess, or is that just
resource timing?
Resource timing, trying to
maybe element timing too. Actually, I don't remember what the name there is.
Yeah.
I mean, the benefit of having the name there is that you can just get entries by name to get all the entries of a. Oh, actually, no, that's not a benefit. Oh no, that is a benefit. get all the entries by name will give you the entries of a specific event type.
Yeah.
So that seems like
If I
desirable.
care about click events, I can just get them, and I guess that makes sense. And cancelable, correct me if I'm wrong, but this distinguishes between passive and active events, right?
What do you mean passive?
So non-cancelable events can be optimized by the browser to run asynchronously, where cancelable events have to run synchronously because they can be canceled, right? And they're blocking the thing that they're supposed to be doing.
Yes. I don't
Yeah.
remember the exact reasoning for adding the cancelable attribute, to be honest. I think it was based on feedback, but like from way long ago, so I don't have all the context. I don't remember all the context. Is it something you think is not necessary?
No, I think it's like on the contrary. I missed it, I guess, in the previous iterations, and this seems like something we want to potentially make people aware of, that, a long event that is cancelable is significantly worse than a long event that's non-cancelable. So ideally, if people have long events, we want them to opt into making those events passive, if
I see.
possible.
Yeah, that's usually not possible, right?
That depends, I guess, on what the.
Yeah, it depends.
I guess it's mostly relevant for scroll events, which they're excluded from here.
Yeah, that's
yeah. Yeah. Anyway, interesting and worthwhile to put some thought into developer advice here.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I will make sure to talk to DevRel about it a little bit.
Cool.
Well, at least Chrome DevRel. All right, any other questions from this slide? And now the one I haven't talked too much about, which I said might give you the way to see which ones are supported, is event counts. It is basically an interface listing all the events that have been dispatched for every event type. But I guess we would have to make the attributes optional until you support that event type, right? Otherwise, if you just implement it and return 0 because you didn't support it, then that wouldn't give you event type.
Wouldn't it make more sense for, if, for example, I don't support touch end, I just drop that attribute and it's undefined?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't say it properly, sorry.
Yeah, okay.
I'm saying you would do that as opposed to implementing it but reporting always 0. Of course, that also doesn't make much sense, but something we should perhaps point out in the spec so that it is a reliable way to identify the input event types that are supported by the user agent.
Yeah.
Why not expose it as a map rather than just an interface like that?
A map.
A map object.
Yes, I don't remember why. A map of dumb string to unsigned long, something like that.
Yeah, I mean, like you would pass a string click and it would return, the number.
Yeah, I thought I had looked into that, but to be honest, that was long ago, so I don't remember. I will look into it again, I suppose.
So
Make sure it's either possible or not possible. If it's possible, it makes sense for it to be a map, but I don't remember why it's not possible, so I have to look into
Okay,
it.
all right. That's fine. If you can find the information, that's fine. If you cannot, that's fine as well. I think. I was just making sure you had considered it.
Right. I'm pretty sure I did, but maybe I was wrong when I did consider it. So maybe it is possible.
Presumably, we'd want the same names as the event timing attributes we're getting from there.
The same names as sorry, what?
So there's the name attribute in performance event timing. Presumably, we'd want the same names for the counters as we have for the timing events.
Right, but the map would just use the string with the name of the event type, like so yeah, it's unclear why I decided to do it this way, so I have to look into it. All right, any other questions?
yeah, it would be interesting to ask other implementers for their plans with this, but
yeah,
on future call, I guess.
Tough luck. Yeah, that's the end of my slides, so I guess I'll stop presenting if there's no other questions.
Okay, cool.
Right, Nicolas, there's just one thing. I'm just, a lot of time we gather, measurements for perf, but some other group, who try to understand user behavior, they're also interested in some other measurements to see how well or not a feature is used. And I'm just wondering, like, those group might be interested by saying, hey, how many clicks, the user did to do his tasks. And in this case, this API will not work because there's a threshold of, 100 millisecond, or as you said, we could maybe lower that limit. But I'm just wondering, like, if you expect to have some people asking you, hey, can we use that API to measure the number of clicks my user use on my app?
Well, I mean, there is the event counts, which gives you the number of clicks, right?
Regardless of the threshold.
Yeah. So the event counts gives you the total number. That's the idea.
Okay, so you do offer that. Okay.
You use the total number to normalize the number of slow events, right? Because otherwise you just know there is like 10 slow events, but if the next day you get 20 slow events, you don't know if your website just got twice as slow or if it got twice as popular or what happened. So the idea is event counts will count the total number of input events of that type, regardless of whether they pass any threshold or not.
And only for your frame. If there's if you insert an iframe in your app or page, you will not know the number of click there.
Yes, correct. Unless, well, only clicks whose target belongs to your frame. Yes.
Yeah.
You could technically hijack clicks.
And Nicholas, the event counts said something about asynchronous delivery of those counts. Is that just like a they won't be, the interface won't be updated immediately, but rather soon?
Thinking about it more, I think we can implement it by updating immediately. If I have to look into it, I think that the events being exposed are not, at least on Chrome, not being filtered out in the browser process. But you could think of another user agent who filters out some of these events in the browser process. That is, it does not send them to the render process of the corresponding frame.
Yeah.
And in those cases, there is no alternative but to populate them asynchronously. So
I would just want to make sure that at the point that the performance entry for the event timing was added, like I don't want them to get out of sync, right? Like
right. So yeah, ideally there should be some guidance there, like if the performance entry is dispatched, then the event counts must include that entry in
include that entry as well. Exactly. Yep.
Something like that makes sense to me.
Yep.
And that should be pretty doable because by then you already know a visit. Yeah.
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 Yeah, but generally the event counts include events that have or doesn't have a handler.
Correct.
Which is why they could theoretically be only handled in the browser process and not propagated necessarily all the way to the renderer.
Yes.
Yeah.
The event dispatch does mention very briefly that you can skip some steps if you want, if you see into the future and you know that nothing's going to happen. Something very hand-wavy like that. But yeah, it is theoretically possible. But I believe in Chrome at the moment, we would catch them all in the renderer.
Yeah. Cool.
All right. Thanks for the feedback.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So now we don't have a ton of. I wanted to run a check on the status of incubations and see whether folks are interested in potentially adopting at least some of them to the working group. But that will probably have to wait for another meeting with some more folks around. Otherwise, we have a bunch of untriaged issues. I looked at them briefly earlier, and they don't seem super. Like most of them just seem like work, but it seems like we should triage them to just see which of them are blocking versus non-blocking. So let me try to start out by navigation timing 117. I copied them to they're on the agenda. So we have better integration with resource timing from Nicholas. Where this seems mostly around timing allow origin checks.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I just find it super confusing that the two specs differ on the timing allow origin checks they do for the same attributes. Maybe it's correct, but yeah, it's
so it seems like something we want to handle before shipping any of them. Is that a correct estimate?
Before what? Sorry.
Before publishing either of them as L2, and because the plan for L2 is to publish the spec as they are now, more or less, barring blocking issues, and then rewrite them as a single spec that's rebased on fetch. So in L3, this problem will most probably go away, just from the nature of the rewrite, but you're saying that the current state is confusing and we should fix it before. Is that
Well, I would like someone who actually knows what all of these attributes mean to go over them and make sure that the security checks in navigation timing are not needed.
So for these ones, domain lookup connects, secure connection, request and response. For navigation timing, those are just always exposed, right? Because it's of the navigation timing interface itself, like for that page. As long as there weren't any redirects or something, right?
Well, I mean, a navigation can have multiple redirects. So what is this domain looking up? Is it?
It's always the last entry.
Okay, if it's
It's the last.
out the last one, then I think it should be fine. But yeah, this is the kind of things that I'm like, we should probably make sure they're fine.
And the reason that it's inconsistent is because for resources you need to opt in specifically via TAO, right? Whereas for nav timing, it's always of the current page.
Yeah. So basically, for nav timing allow origin on its own resource always passes in a sense.
Right.
But it seems to merit make this blocking and then have someone go over that and make sure that this is that the defined behavior is indeed what we want it to be.
Right.
And I see what you're saying, Nicholas. You said that in the navigation timing processing model, it links to resource timing, which does a TAO check instead of the same origin check. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's the other confusing part. We're using a method that shouldn't be used because it's different, right?
Right. I see what you're saying.
So perhaps that part is just cleanup, but like if someone hasn't implemented that, then they're gonna have a hard time understanding what they're supposed to do.
Yeah. So yeah, I just marked that as blocking L2, and yeah, someone, probably me.
Someone too.
Yeah, we'll have to look into that. Okay, issue 116, which we already discussed a bunch, is the hitting enter on the address bar to the same URL. Is it a type of reload or not? And I know that WebKit folks had several examples where it's clearly not a reload. For example, if the page you're on you arrived as basically, if you navigated using a post, typing that will it's resubmitting the post. It asks you whether you want to resubmit, so it's not a reload. I believe that was their example.
I still think that we shouldn't be defining the reloads based on how the user got to it, which is like in this case hitting enter, but based on what the user agent is doing. Seems more correct in terms of performance analytics stuff.
Yeah.
Which means that this is still just blocking on HTML defining reloads, and in particular for each reload what should be done.
Yeah.
So right now,
go ahead.
I'm just saying right now we point to reload, but like it's not defined anywhere. And there's now several kinds of, well, like there's memory caches and all those. So that'll be fun, but I don't think it's our job to define all of those.
I agree. So I think we can make this blocking point to reload triggered navigation and make sure that we're just pointing there. And then I have an HTML issue open on, more strictly defining what a reload triggered navigation is. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I'm marking this as L2 just to make sure that we are pointing into the right place. But that, yeah, we'll be able to close it then and define everything that needs to be defined for reload as part of HTML. But I 100% agree with you that it's a complex landscape where different browsers are doing different things. Yeah. Okay. And I think this is it for navigation timing, but let me verify if we have, no, that is not true. We have a new issue, surface chunk network timing details, issue
What's
1.
the number? Sorry. When what?
123. I will add it to the agenda. So yeah, for sites using HTTP chunking for the main page, it can be useful to disambiguate between the time an element is displayed from the element timing API and when it arrives on the client at the network level, but not yet processed. For instance, if the navigation timing API surfaced the time and size of each HTTP chunk received on the client, it would be possible to map this data back to the time specific elements were received from the network and use this to determine the delay between receiving and displaying a particular element. And we have so it's John Tedesco, I believe Google, who opened that. Yeah. Yes. And Noam Halfman from Microsoft commented that this would be great and a very useful addition. So this seems like a useful addition. It also seems like something that, it seems like a feature request that can be bumped to the next level.
Yeah, I agree. It's also not clear who would work on that feature at the moment, right?
Yes.
Since we have agreed to make the resource timing and navigation timing specs a little more sane before adding new features, then we should probably respect that.
Yeah, I agree. So marking that as L3. And what do folks think about that in general in terms of just the feature request? Anyone super excited or super unexcited about that?
Or everyone indifferent?
From a RUM point of view, we haven't really had any of our customers request this. The only thing I can think of would be like PDF delivery, maybe.
So
I don't know.
So from my perspective, I think that this can be useful for RUM for debugging DAG servers. So web page task added something very similar in terms of just the coloring of here. This, a chunk was transferred here, But here, even though we have an ongoing fetch, nothing was passing on the wire. And I can imagine something similar being done in RUM and enable you to point out, oh, the H2 server is messed up or whatever other lower layer problem. But it's interesting that no one, like, you didn't hear that request from anyone.
No, but I agree with you that if we added it, people would probably start being able to fix things with it, right? So better visibility is always usually helpful for triaging things like this. So especially once people start seeing things in synthetic, they start requesting them more in RUM. So with WebHSS leading the way here and stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if we don't start getting more requests for this for more advanced customers.
Okay. Cool. Okay, and the last issue for nav timing, which is an interesting one, just saw it today. Not going to read all of it, but 124, issue 124. And basically, when a service worker is present, we have transfer size, encoded body size, and decoded body size. It's not very clear what information they should represent in terms of, potentially the responses have been synthesized by the service worker. Not all of them went through the network. And I don't think that the spec is currently doing a good job at defining what those values should be.
But do we have a clear sense of what they should be? Or do you think it would be useful to gather some service worker folks and talk about it?
I think it would be interesting to talk about those values in the context of service worker use cases. Yes, so also in terms of, in terms of security, I don't know if you could, for example, what happens if the generated response from service worker includes a timing allow origin for a resource that is a cross origin resource but is served, or maybe no, they can't do that because it's opaque, so they cannot modify the response headers for an opaque response. So that basically you cannot generate opaque responses. So that's more comforting from a security standpoint in the exposure of that. But yeah, it would be interesting to talk to service worker folks and figure that out.
Right. So I guess your question is this L2 blocking?
Yeah.
Is that the question?
That's my question, and I suspect that it is, as much as it's making me sad.
Like a pretty important issue.
Yeah. Okay, so level 2 it is. Yeah. And okay. And with that, we are done with navigation timing untrashed issues and also out of time. So thanks all for joining, and I will see you in a couple of weeks. And stay safe. Cheers.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.